This episode of The Answer is Yes Baja Sessions is brought to you by Baja Bound Insurance Services. Driving to Mexico? You can buy and print out your Mexican auto insurance policy online in minutes with their easy-to-use website. They also have great travel information to help you plan your trip south of the border. Visit bajabound.com.
Hi, this is Ryan Thomas. Welcome to the Baja Sessions, where we chat with interesting people with interesting stories about all things related to the majestic peninsula of Baja California. Our guest today is no stranger to the peninsula, but unlike many of our guests who've logged serious miles on the dirt or the pavement, Jim McCoy is probably more familiar with Baja from the air than he is from the ground. Jim, welcome to the Baja Sessions, and I want to start things off by having you validate that statement. I tell people most of the time when I talk about Baja that I'm actually more familiar with the peninsula from and in the dirt than I am from and or on the highway. And my guess is that you've probably logged way more hours at this point from the air than the ground, and I'm looking for you to validate that to start off with.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate being on. And it's, as you know, we just did a little Baja trip of our own in Razors, which I don't get to do that often. Probably I've only done 10 or 15 trips, maybe on land. And at this point, I'm in the, 60 or 70 trips in the air, all the way down the peninsula to Cabo now, probably 10 times via air, maybe more. Well, down and back, so 20. So, yeah, it's great. I mean, the other day on our trip, we were out and I was trying to figure out where we were. And I wasn't necessarily looking at the roads or anything really around me. I was more looking at the mountain terrain around me to get an idea of which mountains were near, which I know from the air. So that is a very true statement.
I use bushes and rocks on the trail as my landmarks, and it sounds like you use the mountains and whatnot that you find and see from the air. So let's go backwards, though. We obviously were hinting that you are a pilot, the owner of, is it Raven Helicopters or Raven Aviation?
Raven Helicopters. We're located at Gillespie Field in San Diego, California.
And you weren't born a helicopter pilot, so take us back to kind of the beginning of it. And I believe this whole thing with helicopters somewhat started as a hobby, but has definitely turned into a business for you. Tell us a little bit about how you got to that point.
It has. So I went to San Diego State. While I was going to San Diego State, I was racing jet skis at the time. And while racing jet skis, doing, work here and there, part-time jobs, kind of like you do in college. And ended up working for a boat rental business in Mission Bay. And, 4 years working for them, I realized I could do a better job on my own. So I started my own boat rental company 25 years ago. I got 2 locations on Mission Bay. And then about, 14 years ago now, almost coming up on 15 years ago, my friend Steve Wright, a guy from the Baja, raced 3-wheelers for Factory Honda. And he was getting a helicopter. I went flying with him and said, this is the coolest thing ever. I mean, you can literally go anywhere you want and do anything you want. And I always had this crazy fascination with helicopters, TV shows, movies. If it had a helicopter in it, I was watching it. So I just told myself, you know what, I'm going to get my license. I'm going to go fly around with my friend Steve. I wasn't even really that good of friends with Steve. And now we're, best friends. It's because through aviation, we've created this friendship. And so started taking lessons. About 6 weeks into my lessons, I started looking at buying helicopters. I bought a helicopter 3 months later after I started taking lessons. And at that point, there was no turning back, and I told my wife that I was going to, to offset the cost of the helicopter. I'm like, I'm going to do these off-road races. A lot of people seem to use helicopters and things like that. And so I was fortunate enough. Mark Burnett was my first customer for down in Baja. Went down and chased him back when he was racing a motorcycle. And so chased for him. And then just randomly, I was able to meet up with Robbie Pierce. And I flew for Robbie Pierce for probably 8 or 9 years after that. And there was some good times with them, with Rob McCacherin, Robbie Pierce, the Impact Rockstar team. And when he kind of shut down his racing program, John Vance left there and went to Tisco. And the Tisco guys never used helicopters. but they said, John said, hey, we think it's a really good asset for your race team. And they signed off on it. And so I was with Tisco up until, I still am flying for Tisco. The Wyricks are not racing anymore, but when Andy McMillan was there for 2 years, I flew for him. And now I'm just kind of all over the place. I'm doing Polaris factory racing. I do all their aviation stuff for all their off-road races, the big ones, the big 5 and 6 stuff kind of things. I've filmed for Score for a long time. I do Cameron Steele's Rip to Cabo Trail Emissions, and that's who now, when Tisco kind of pulled back the reins a little bit, I was a bit of an open wild card, and so I got picked up by Cameron Steele to race all his Baja races and stuff like that. And then I've got 2 helicopters now, and one of them does the Alexander Racing Team, which they race a 6100 team. We've been with them now for 2 years. The other one does all the Polaris work, and then all the other races in between, whatever people want to do.
So you're obviously, to the listeners, you can tell that there is a connection to the motorsports world again, and this podcast is geared towards an audience that is in any way interested in all things related to Baja. And so while the racing stuff is obviously the connection that, ultimately that you and I have, really, there is, I got the opportunity, and I've been in your helicopter a few times, but I flew down to San Felipe from San Diego a couple of months ago with your friend Steve Wright. And it was the first time that I've really ever paid attention to the scenery and the geography without a motorsports angle or honestly a surfing angle. I've been in the air quite a few times up and down the peninsula, but I really took in the geography and the scenery and realized how beautiful the peninsula actually is. So to steer a little bit away from the motorsports side of this, again, you talked about the numerous trips top to bottom that you've made. Are there some standout locations that you've been able to see and or discover from the air that you're willing to share with anybody that's listening?
Absolutely. There are. We run across these places that people have never been. I try to take photos of them, and by doing that, we're able to look them up on a map, with a geo fencing or geo location on your phone. And so I always show Cameron those kind of places and stuff. But even, rocky sections, one of my favorite sections really is from the El Rosario Wash up to La Libera, or even all the way up to, say, Loreto. It's this crazy rocky terrain and stuff. It's just absolutely beautiful. Really, I guess take that back. My ultimate section I love to show first-time people is you're coming through Mulegé, you're going down the road, and you get the same experience in a car a little bit, but not to the extent that I get. As soon as you make that right turn, you've got the Bay of Conception in front of you, and it's just absolutely beautiful. But when you're in your car, in your motorcycle, whatever, that's all you can see is from right there. Well, I continue straight out and land on the islands and look around, and it's unbelievable down there. The water and to be able to go to places where you can only see either by boat or by car, you're very limited to what from the air you can see anything. And being in a helicopter, you can really do anything. Just recently, I was down in Loreto on a Toyota commercial, and we flew. It was no wind, sunrise, so I flew all around the Gigantas, the mountains there, the mountain range on the right between there and the Mission, and it looked like Hawaii to me. It was all green and just unbelievable. It was such a great experience. So those kind of places to me are just they'll always be in my heart.
So waterfalls.
Yes.
I know of a couple waterfalls down in southern Baja. Actually, a couple of them that are up off of Diablo Dry Lake and Laguna Salada. It's funny because when you share that, the concept of waterfalls, or really even oases to that matter, or oases, if that's the way you say it, with people that really aren't familiar with Baja, they envision cactus and desert. But the idea of an oasis with waterfalls and lagoons is not something that people are expecting to hear about. So exactly. I got to believe you've found some waterfalls that are more than likely inaccessible to anybody unless you got a helicopter.
Exactly. No, we have. And Unfortunately, I haven't seen them really ripping, with the water, because then, how down in Mexico, you got to be there right when it's raining to really get the good stuff. But
Yeah.
Kevin Ward, good friend of ours, the director of photography for Dust to Glory, he found one that we've all been. I don't know if you've been to it. It's called Waterfalls, but it's absolutely unbelievable. We brought.
Wait. Kevin Ward found it, and it's called Waterfalls.
He called it. They called it Waterfalls. Yeah, I'm sure there's a real name for it. But
that's fair.
We now call it Waterfalls. But I mean, we brought rock climbing gear and climbed down in these, like, where the water has eroded, these crazy corkscrews and stuff down down 20, 30 feet down, but it's probably 120, 140 foot waterfall. And I would just love to be there when it's raining, because the wash that it comes to this dam area is big enough I can land my helicopter in it. And then it just goes cascading off like a 130 foot cliff down to another, riverbed down below it. And just absolutely incredible. The mountainous terrain and rocky terrain, waterfalls over by, so just west of Catafina, if you're heading out towards Gonzaga Bay and things like that. So they've talked about that there's back the Mission Trail used to come up through there somewhere. And I've looked all over for it, but, you could see where probably is where they're walking, but, nothing shows, no rocks placed or anything like that, making bridges or anything like that. But that area too, I mean, it's just unbelievable. These canyons that you're able to fly in, they're 300 feet wide and just fly up them for miles and miles. It's unbelievable.
So you made a comment when we first started talking, and I want to give you the opportunity to clarify this. And it was something along the lines of, with the helicopter, you can go anywhere and do anything you want. We all know that as much as we like to think that or we joke about Baja being the Wild West, there are rules, there are laws. And from what I can tell, you're obviously a very good pilot and experienced down there, but you also follow the rules. And I guess that's what I was getting at, is that there are rules, there are laws, and you do follow them. You're not down there as a full-on cowboy just doing whatever you want to do. Is it difficult to get things in order? So, and I don't expect that we're going to have thousands of helicopter pilots on this listening to this podcast, but you never know. What is a guy that is a pilot that is interested in flying, whether it's helicopter or fixed wing? What's a guy that is a pilot and is interested in going to Baja? What does he need to know?
So a couple things. I mean, just as far as logistics, you file with customs before you leave. You have to land at a port of entry when you enter Mexico. So for me, it's always San Felipe, Ensenada, or Tijuana. I can't go any farther. In my airplane, I can make it to Cabo, but that'd be my port of entry. But you're doing stuff, paperwork wise, with who's on board, their passport numbers, photos, things like that. When you come back across the border, you land at Brownfield or Calexico, same kind of thing. But the best asset for that is a thing called the Baja Bush Pilots, and they talk about all the airports and all that kind of stuff. I've looked into it a little bit, but I've kind of done mine a little bit trial by error, in a sense. Really no error, just more like trial. And for us, luckily, I've had Cameron Steele along the way with me, helping me out with, now we have film permits. We have permits that we can land at certain places and towns, and from the Navy, from the military, from this local police. And that's really helped. And by doing that, we're able to do a little bit more than the normal person is. Normal person in Mexico, really technically in a helicopter, you're airport to airport without these special permits. And to get these, you need to go through tourism, film people, all these kind of things. So it's always you've seen some of the places we've landed. It's unbelievable. Some of the hotel parking lots they put me in and things like that. You can't believe what you're getting into. Just recently, I just got back from 6 days in the Sonora, Mexico, which is, to me, Baja still, but technically not. But it's amazing.
So Sonora, just people that are listening, and just to put it in the frame of reference, it's across the Sea of Cortez.
Yes.
So similar area, but on the other side of the Sea of Cortez, part of mainland Mexico.
Yes. But so if that answers your question, though, about what we're able to do.
Absolutely does. And you've mentioned Cameron Steele a couple times, and those of you that are new to listening to the Baja Sessions, you may not know this, but if you go back several episodes, I do believe that Jim Riley, one of the other hosts from this show, has interviewed Cameron at least once, maybe more than once. And I think some of the discussion was actually